comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
Hello and welcome to Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger, and today we have, for the umpteenth time, a returning guest, Dan Szymborski. Dan, welcome and thanks again for coming on.
Hey Wayne, always fun. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm actually doing the show from downstairs sipping my coffee. So I've never. It sounds weird, but I've never done the show from this particular remote location instead of my bedroom. So I guess it's a breakthrough. So okay.
So
now,
is it from a bunker or is it just from the normal house? You have like a secret layer?
It's from the normal house, but the room is wide open. I'm wondering if I was worried that it might be a little echoey. Because
you get a little more resonance than normal, I think, but I think it's okay.
Okay. Well, I didn't get home till almost 5 in the morning. I worked really late, and so there was no way that I was going to do this show without coffee, and I couldn't finish my coffee before it was time to do the show. So here we are. So I actually made a list for today's show. And we are going to do something, but I'm gonna do what the networks do. I'm gonna do a little teaser. In a little while, we're gonna do the all rock team, and I'll explain that in a minute. So, but first, let's talk about. I mean, here we are. It's June 15th. Getting close to the July trade deadline. Lots of, we're already starting to get candidates who might be traded. Who do you look at? And if you have, I don't know if you're one of those, I will call you columnists that actually speak to baseball personnel and might hear something about this or that, and this person told me on the condition of anonymity, type of thing. What do you think are the most likely players to get traded and most likely destinations?
Well, I do talk to people in baseball. I'm not Ken Rosenthal, of course, but I do hear what's going on behind the scenes quite a bit. We're not at the point where you get a lot of specificity of where players are actually going to go. You just really start to hear kind of the buzz about some of the teams and who's being talked about. And we're still at the stage where it's the obvious guys, various Orioles, maybe a few Royals like Mike Moustakas. I think that a lot of teams aren't psychologically at that point where they're definitely sellers. I think you look to, say, the Blue Jays, as an example of a team that is in selling territory now. I don't think they've quite come around to it. The American League's a little clearer than the NL right now, because you look at the American League, there are only 6 teams that are above 500 in the American League. And outside of that, it drops off pretty quickly. You have a few teams hanging around 500, but the Tigers aren't going to be buyers, even though they're near 500. The Rays aren't going to be buyers. The A's probably aren't. So we do have some clarity in the AL, at least.
Well, I'm surprised you haven't, the way you say that you wouldn't think the Orioles are sellers yet?
Oh no, I thought I might have misspoke then. No, the Orioles are definitely sellers. It's just a question of where someone like Machado goes. Now, the general belief, among insiders at least, is that the Orioles are going to end up with less for Machado than they really, really wanted. I've felt for a while the Orioles are kind of a little backwards on the whole analysis thing, at least in the decision making, the people who make decisions. I think that they would have gotten a much larger package for Machado if they had traded him last year than they're going to get for trading 2 months of him, literally.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Now, taking salary into consideration, and also taking into consideration that he seems to be set on playing shortstop, what do you think are the, for lack of a better term, trading partner options are for the Orioles trading Machado?
Well, what makes me concerned about getting value for Machado is when Corey Seager was injured several weeks ago, and the Dodgers were really at the bottom of the NL West except for the Padres. That was the time where if someone was going to give a large package for Manny Machado, if someone was going to throw in like a bunch of prospects, that was the time it was going to happen. But it didn't. And that it didn't happen makes me think that it probably won't happen, at least to the Dodgers. Because you look at the Dodgers, they're a lot less desperate than they were a few weeks ago. The rest of the Arizona Diamondbacks lost like 12 of 15. Then the Colorado Rockies are slumping. It's given them that huge opportunity to come back in the division. And now you look at the Dodgers roster, and all of a sudden it just looks a lot better. It's a lot more stable than it was a few weeks ago. They have Jock Peterson, who they're happy with. Matt Kemp has still stayed a quality player. It's hard to believe from last year, but he's legitimately playing really well this year. So I think the Dodgers might actually be out on Machado, and that kind of makes things a little foggier about where he would actually end up. He still could end up at third short term, but now you're looking at teams like that need shortstop. You're talking teams like the Diamondbacks, the Brewers, and I can't see teams like that giving up huge amounts of prospects for that. So I'm a little unsure right now about what the Machado market is really going to end up being.
I agree. And the other thing about the Dodgers is Chris Taylor actually, has been holding it down at shortstop, and he's been hitting much better as of late as well, which also diminishes the need.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were comfortable with him in the outfield, and when Seager was injured, of course, there was a great deal of uncertainty about putting Taylor back at shortstop. And that's when a team like the Dodgers that expects to be a contender has uncertainty, that's when they will typically give up players of value to get, a short-term boost. But the fact is that after a weak April, Taylor had a terrific May. He's been terrific in June. His seasonal numbers are up to the level that they're really, really good at shortstop. So the Dodgers have a lot less to be worried about. And the Orioles have more to be worried about now.
And also the fact that you have Mike Moustakas available, you have James Donaldson possibly available. I would imagine if the right offer came along.
I think Moustakas is definitely gone at some point this year. It was always kind of an awkward reunion since essentially they bid themselves out of the market in free agency. Donaldson's a little trickier simply because he hasn't really played at the level, and there's been some injury concerns. So it's possible that the Blue Jays have actually missed the boat there also. Although it's more excusable with the Orioles because they had better hopes for the playoffs than the Orioles did coming into the season.
And for someone like Moustakas, do you see a possibility of maybe Cleveland and moving Jose Ramirez to second and sending Jason Kipnis to the bench? Do you think that's a possible or even likely scenario?
I think at this point the Indians really can't expect to get a lot from Kipnis. That's the fact that he hasn't bounced back. He hasn't had that so-called dead cat bounce. It really makes the Indians likely a lot more receptive to picking up at least a short-term solution at third base. Obviously, they'd prefer Machado over anyone if everything's equal, but I don't think they would meet that package. So Donaldson or Moustakas, I think, is probably a better target right now simply because of the risk involved. And it's when you make a veteran pickup, you're not doing it because it's risky. You're doing it because you're trying to avoid risk. So I'm not sure if the Josh Donaldson market will actually just ever come to pass.
You said, okay, you just did a Ralph Tycho. You said
did
Josh Allen. You just said Josh Allenson. So now we have to check the
I said
obituaries
Allenson?
tomorrow. Yeah, so now we have to check the obituaries tomorrow to make sure that a guy named Josh Allenson didn't die.
I said
you remember that story, right?
Yeah, but I'm not.
That was the Gary Shandling story, and you know, he mixed up Ron Chandler for Gary Shandling, and then the next day Gary Shandling was dead. So we always have this thing on the show when somebody call somebody by another name, that the person they're called by, that
I called him Donaldson the other times, didn't I?
You did only that one time. But listen, it only takes one time to kill the guy, you know.
I'm a little worried. You see, I'm turning 40 in a few days, so I'm starting to think that perhaps my mind is going.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing you don't have to worry about. I don't think you have to worry about anybody like accidentally saying Dan Szymborski instead of somebody else's name.
But they'll say Dave Szymborski. I've been called Dave quite a bit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any cousins named Dave?
Not that I know of. People call me Dave sometimes. And I used to, I don't know if I still am, I used to be fairly high in the Google search results for Dave Szymborski. Let's see, I've slid down. I don't think I'm on Dave Szymborski's second page now. I used to have like 4 of the top 10, but I guess people have figured out my name over the years.
Interesting. And one more thing about Machado, and this is personal observation, and I actually got to see him play in person against Tampa a couple of weeks ago. To me, he was far, far better defensively at third base than he's shown me so far at shortstop.
The stats to a great degree have backed that up. He played better shortstop a couple of years ago when he was kind of called into duty when J.J. Hardy was injured. So it has been a little disappointing. I don't think it really kills his value. Baseball Reference already has him at 10 runs below average this season at shortstop, but he's still going on pace for like a 5-win season at shortstop. So it's not something that's going to be like a complete turn off to teams, but there's just isn't that upside that it looked to be, at least at shortstop coming into the season. But he's really helped his value either way, because he also has an OPS near 1,000, which he's never done before. So it's balanced out a bit.
Okay.
But
at least my eyes did not deceive me.
No, at least so far the numbers have generally been backing you up that he's been a below average shortstop by a significant margin.
Okay. Tell me your all-star ballot so far.
Oh, I never fill out an all-star ballot. The all-star game is kind of my least favorite event of the season, because it just doesn't feel like an all-star game, because they don't play it like an actual game of baseball. It's played like this kind of weird exhibition, you know. Everybody gets to play an at-bat. Every team gets a player. Every pitcher throws, 2 batters. So it's not an exciting event for me as it was when I was a kid, because seeing these players go against each other isn't novel anymore. I mean, there are interleague games every day. It's just seeing like a Yankee go off against a Cub. It's just not that interesting. Simply because the game I hated when it was this time it counts, because it felt like that real events were happening based on what happened in a kind of a goofy exhibition game. I tend to like things like the Home Run Derby more than the All-Star game at this point, because at least you're seeing it feels like it matters more in a way.
Okay, I'm just going to hit you with a couple of different choices based on what I've seen as far as discussion goes, where guys are going back and forth. Okay, first base in the NL, Freddie Freeman, Joey Votto, or Brandon Belt?
Oh, it's got to be Freeman right now. He's the best first baseman in baseball. If he doesn't start, I don't know what you're doing. Well, not you personally.
I agree. There's been discussion, although I don't see, why it's there yet, but Gleyber Torres or Jose Altuve?
Oh, well, at second, I think you definitely have to go with Altuve. There's little question about that, I think.
No, I agree as well. So,
and I love what Torres has done, but when you talk a star level player, Altuve has pretty much established that. I think he's clearly the best second baseman in the American League and really baseball overall.
Okay, shortstop. Okay, Francisco Lindor, Manny Machado, or Andrelton Simmons, or Gene Segura?
I think Lindor is the best at the position. I think it's close between him and Correa, but I would personally give the slight nod to Lindor. I think he's the better defensive player, and I'd love to pick Simmons simply because he was so amazing last year, but I tend to, when I pick the best player, I don't necessarily pick the most recent 6 months or anything. I kind of pick going forward, and if you gave me a choice going forward and said, who's going to be better, I probably wouldn't say Simmons, even though he probably should have gotten some serious MVP consideration last year. But he's an amazing player now that he's actually hits the ball.
Catcher in the American League, Wilson, and I mean, there's not much out there, but and I think it's crazy that Gary Sanchez is still getting a lot of consideration, but the other alternative is Wilson Ramos.
I still think that Gary Sanchez is the best catcher in the American League. Yeah, his batting average is low, but that's because he has a batting average of balls in play under 200, and that's not really a real thing. Because pitchers hitting tend to have a batting average of balls in play around 210 to 225 in that range. And there's no way that a guy who hit 33 home runs last year is worse at hitting hard to field balls than a random pitcher is. I think I hate saying going for it, but I think if you look the rest of the season, Sanchez is the most likely to be the best catcher for the rest of the year. I think he is a star right now. But again, it also depends on what your conception of the All-Star game is. I tend to want the absolute best players, which may not be the net best players to date this year.
Okay, I look at it differently. I think it should be the best players to date this year. And where I get the Rays games locally, so I've caught Wilson Ramos quite a bit, and he's with the exception of being like maybe one of the worst base runners, besides being slow, I see him make too many Jorge Posada decisions on the bases as well. And for National League catcher, is it Posey or Real Muto?
Oh, I think it's always Posey. I think Posey, until Posey has an actual bad season, I think that he is the best catcher in the National League. He gets my bid if I was in charge of it, which I'm not.
Okay. Now we go to the all-rock team and the all-liftoff team. And Gary, I guess Gary Sanchez will probably be on your all-liftoff team. So
I think I'll have a much better pick than that.
Yeah, so let me explain to our listeners. Last year, Dan said that at this time, maybe even a little earlier, that Avisail Garcia is going to drop like a rock. And while
he didn't,
he didn't. He did this year though, but that's
before he was injured. Yeah, he wasn't playing well, but I can't claim victory. It didn't happen.
So I decided, told Dan ahead of time, like, be prepared with an all-rock team and as well as an all-liftoff team, guys who are, like according to what Dan sees in the numbers, batted balls in play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have an all-rock team and an all-liftoff team. So let's start with the all-rock team. Who's going to drop like a rock? Who's going to say, what fantasy owner is going to say, damn, I shouldn't have traded for him, in June when he was hot, because he's never done it before.
Well, I'm still not convinced on Ronaldo Lopez's performance this year. I apparently like to pick on White Sox players. I've always liked Blake Snell. I'm not convinced. I mean, I should be at this point, I think, but I'm not convinced he's this good. His ERA has been down around 2.5 all year, and I don't think he's an under 3 guy. I think he's an excellent pitcher, but I don't think he's quite that good. I'm a little worried about Jake Arrieta, which might seem a little weird, simply because I projected him to pitch well. But you look at his strikeout rate has kind of dropped to kind of dangerous territories. I know he's been successful because he hasn't been allowing any home runs. But when you have a guy who loses more than a quarter of his strikeout rate in a single year, and last year he had some struggles even, you kind of worry about that coming back to bite him down the stretch. Now you might be able to say he's a different pitcher than he was before, which is possible, but it does add some risk to him dropping off. I think now if we go over to the hitter side, I almost want to still put Chris Davis on the list just because he's been that terrible. I don't think he is going to come back anytime soon. But I won't say him because he probably won't be worse than he is right now. On the hitter side, I'm not convinced that Eddie Rosario is a star because he's actually, I think, in the top 10 in WAR in the American League. I'm not really convinced that he's a 310 hitter. So I expect a drop off from him. Mitch Haniger's turning me into a believer. I'm just not sure he's quite where he is yet. Brian Anderson, maybe, of the Marlins. Nobody really has watched the Marlins this year, but he's been defensively okay, but he's been a terrific hitter at third base. He has an OPS over 800 for the Marlins. Not that anyone's noticed anything that the Marlins have done.
And your all liftoff team. Well, we know about Gary Sanchez.
Yeah, I think Sanchez will be better. I still hope, maybe I'm just holding out some hope since, my vestiges of being an Orioles fan. But I think that Alex Cobb will continue to pitch better. His ERA is kind of skewed by his really awful first few games, and he's had some pretty good starts the last few weeks. I'm still hopeful that Luis Castillo of the Cincinnati Reds had a terrific debut last year. Has terrific stuff, but his control has been a little spottier this year. He's been hit by teams he shouldn't have had trouble with. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with him, but I still have faith in his abilities. This year for him feels like that kind of poor year that Luis Severino had a few years ago that got people panicking. So I'm hopeful with him. I think that Marcus Stroman has to be better than this. And the same goes with Jeff Samardzija, who's really been terrible. The Giants, outside of Johnny Cueto, it's amazing that they're in contention, considering that the pitching's just been pretty awful.
Well, yeah. And Samardzija's been struggling for years, ever since he's been a free agent, actually. Ever since he came to the Giants. He's never really replicated his walk year.
Now on the batting side, for guys who I expect to play better, I still think Dexter Fowler is a lot better than he's played so far, and I think that's why the Cardinals have been very patient with him. You look at Scott Kingery. I expected more from him in his rookie year than he's actually shown. So I'm a little disappointed that we haven't seen Kingery really take off. But as I said, I'm still hopeful that will be the case once we get to the end of the season. Jesse Winker is kind of in the same category as a good prospect who just isn't really playing that well. He's getting on base, but he hasn't hit for power yet. And it's pretty hard to be a corner outfielder in 2018 and not hit for power. You have to be like amazing at everything else. Eduardo Nunez has been pretty poor, and Cole Calhoun has been really awful. Like, if Chris Davis wasn't playing as poorly, he would have gotten more attention. I think that if he's healthy, because he's been out with an oblique problem, I think he'll turn it around. I'm not as concerned about him as I am about Chris Davis.
Okay. And tell me, are the shifts working as well, or are they working less now that everybody's trying to loft the ball?
The last I checked, they were still working fairly well. I don't like the talk of MLB doing something about the shift, because that's been like the buzz again that they've been talking about it. I think it's a solution looking for a problem, because if you look at it, baseball is not really there's a limited number of in-game tactics that you can really do compared to a game like football, where there's just more variety of plays. Baseball is at its core an individual game that's an individual confrontation between a pitcher and a batter. A lot of the team plays are done almost by rote. Everyone turns a double play pretty much the same way. Everybody throws out a runner from the outfield pretty much the same way. There's not a lot of decision making there, except, throwing to bases. But when you shift and choosing how you place your defense, that's a real tactical difference that played right can benefit you and done poorly can hurt you. And I think that for baseball to lose that kind of decision making, I think it makes the manager's in-game job even less relevant compared to an NFL head coach or an NBA coach, really.
Oh, no, I agree. When I hear this talk, I'm like, no, you're trying to reinvent the wheel. So I'm with you all the way. Well, Dan, once again, I thank you for coming on. And, hey, I looking at the timeline, I hope to see you, I hope to hear from you right before the trade deadline.
Yep, there's a lot of baseball to go. And we're finishing up right on time because my cat's looking at me like he's going to eat me.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
He's literally looking at me, licking his chops at me. So either he expects to get his lunch, because this cat gets lunch, because he's an old cat and it's easier for older cats to get multiple meals rather than like one large one. So hopefully he wants his food and he's not going to, eat my eyes or something.
Okay. Well, listen, go preserve yourself and feed your cat. And I will speak to you next time. And thank you very much again for coming on.
Always fun, Wayne. Have a good one.
Thank you. And that's it, folks, for our show. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time.